Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Devotee of Athena. In the previous episode, I detailed my spiritual path before I became pagan. In today's episode, I am going to be discussing my spiritual path from the day that I became pagan right through until now. While this video is titled My Pagan Journey, during this time I attended silent Buddhist retreats and also explored Islam for a short while. So I will also be discussing this within this episode. I mentioned in the previous video that it was my love of fairies which ultimately led me to paganism. I came across a book called The Fairy Bible, which is where I first discovered altars, rituals, and the Wheel of the Year. It had all the blueprints of paganism, just without the name. It was not long after this that I came across the Spell Bible, which was the same book series as the Fairy Bible. The Spell Bible briefly discussed Wicca and Wiccan principles. But it was ultimately a book of simple and easy to follow spells laid out in a very similar way to a recipe book. I loved the book so much that I also ended up purchasing the Wicca Bible. It is this book which held me into my pagan path. This book gave me a much more comprehensive outline into what Wicca is in a way that was easy and accessible to read to my 12-year-old self. It outlined key principles such as the web of life, the Wiccan reed, and the rule of three. It was also my first introduction into the sacred elements, as well as my first deep dive into the Wheel of the Year. On top of this, it gave me the basics to start setting up my own altar and introduced me to different gods and pantheons. While my path is very different now to when I first began, it was this book that gave me my first insight into the gods at the time, starting with Athena, Hades, Apollo, and Poseidon. For many years, I followed more gods than goddesses and was much more connected to the sacred masculine, which is unusual within paganism, particularly within Wicca. I followed Athena exclusively as the only goddess in my life until around 2019, when I began to connect more with Persephone. At each point in my path, regardless of how it evolved, what remained central was the elements and the Wheel of the Year. Honouring nature and observing the changes and cycles throughout the year is the grounding anchor within my spirituality to this day, with a particular focus on the solstices and the equinoxes. I still had an interest in Buddhism, even though I did not identify as Buddhist, and was lucky enough to attend silent Buddhist retreats where I got to attend Dharma talks. It was during these talks that I learned of Kuan Yin, which is my first taste of the sacred feminine within Buddhism. I have a fluorite figure of Kuan Yin on my sacred feminine altar, which my dad gave to me before he died, so she is an important figure to me. It was also during these talks where I learnt about metta meditation or loving kindness practice, which is a key component of my spiritual path and is much easier said than done. I will do a deeper dive into loving kindness practice in future videos, but it is essentially a process in which you meditate on love, which isn't easy when you get to looking inwards, and is even harder when you attempt to meditate on loving someone you disagree with. It's a practice for a reason. During these retreats, I got to connect with nature in stillness and silence, forming part of a community, but without the confines of social niceties. We were all simply present, no obligations, just living and breathing moment to moment, grounding ourselves in our senses and truly experiencing the Edenic bliss of true connection to earth away from the pressures of society. Over the years, I have also been lucky enough to take pilgrimages to many sacred sites, including St. Nectan's Glen, Stonehenge, Avebury, Tintagel, Glastonbury, and the Roman Baths. All of these places have had profound impacts on my spirituality, but especially Glastonbury and Bath. The city of Bath is home to one of the best preserved temples in the world and one of Britain's only hot springs. The temple was a Roman temple dedicated to Sulis Minerva, a goddess combining aspects of local tribal goddesses with the Roman goddess Minerva. Minerva is to the Romans what Athena was to the Greeks, and therefore I treat this Roman temple as a living, breathing temple in which I get to connect with and honour my goddess. The local spa actually gets its water from the same naturally heated spring as the Roman baths and is just a stone's throw away from it. Therefore, I chose to go there for my 18th birthday so that I could bathe in the waters of the goddess and receive her blessings as I began my journey into adulthood. Glastonbury is equally special to me, as in many respects it is to pagans what the Vatican is to Catholics. That is to say, it is one of the biggest spiritual hubs for modern day pagans in the world. The entire high street is full of spiritual stores. There are two sacred springs and famous ley lines running through the town. And most famously, there is Glastonbury Tor. People of multiple faiths, from pagans to Christians and even Buddhists and Krishnas, all take pilgrimages to Glastonbury. And when you're there, you can see why. Both Glastonbury and Bath will come up in later videos as I will be speaking in more depth about goddess spirituality and, in turn, how these two places have deepened my connection with the goddess. While I was at university, I had a bit of a mental health crisis and felt incredibly lonely and isolated. So, for a short time, I began exploring Abrahamic faiths and did delve into the world of Islam. It was a very short 3-month period through which I realised that I do believe in Big G God, while also believing in the gods. Ultimately, my experiences with the gods were so strong that I could not bind myself to one dogmatic faith, so I returned to paganism. Initially, I delved into Hellenic polytheism, and this was smooth sailing in my exclusive worship of the Greek gods for a considerable time, until I came to the realization that I had neglected the sacred feminine. At the time, I found out that I was neurodivergent and was also researching women's health in depth as part of my university dissertation. This all got me thinking about how I had neglected the goddess in my life. I found out around that time that I have PMDD and have been tracking my cycles ever since. To help keep me disciplined in tracking my cycles, I decided to track my cycle with a lunar calendar and decided to link my spirituality into things. Most books I was reading on the menstrual cycle were already linking different stages of the cycle with the seasons and elements, which fitted naturally within my spiritual path. So I decided to connect with and nurture my body by exploring goddess spirituality. This ultimately led me down a deep path in which I have come out the other side honouring more goddesses than I ever have before, and now also reclaim Eve as a goddess in her own right. My current path is so heavily focused on goddess spirituality that I have decided to do an entirely separate video explaining my path as it exists now. I firmly identify as pagan. However, I definitely am on the eclectic side as I walk the crossroads between Buddhism, paganism, Christianity, and goddess spirituality all in one. But that is a discussion for the next video. Until then, if what I have to say interests you, please come along for the ride as we step forward on this path. You and I, Athena and I. Whatever you decide, may your days be full of peace. Goodbye.